The massive orbital station known as Council Prime hung in the void like a steel mountain, its countless lights twinkling against the star-filled darkness. Inside the central chamber, representatives from across the galaxy gathered for what they believed would be another routine session. The Zephyrians floated in their crystalline pods, while the reptilian Korath delegates hissed quietly among themselves. The insectoid Vec clicked their mandibles in apparent boredom. High Chancellor Zirion of the Altarian Federation called the session to order with a wave of his four-armed form. His voice echoed through the chamber's translation systems. Council members, we gather today to discuss trade disputes in the Outer Rim territories. But before any delegate could respond, the lights flickered. Then they went out completely. Emergency lighting cast an eerie red glow across the chamber as confused murmurs filled the air. The Korath guards immediately moved to defensive positions, their plasma rifles charging with a distinctive whine. Something was wrong. Council Prime's defensive systems were considered impenetrable. What is the meaning of this? Chancellor Zirion demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had ruled for over 2 centuries. The massive viewing screen at the front of the chamber suddenly blazed to life. Instead of the usual council insignia, it showed something that made several delegates gasp in terror. A human face filled the screen. The being looked ordinary enough. Pale skin, brown hair, 2 eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge and patience that spoke of centuries. But what terrified the council members wasn't the human's appearance. It was the fact that humans were supposed to be extinct. Greetings, council members, the human said in perfect galactic standard. His voice was calm, almost conversational. My name is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Remnant Fleet. I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss. Chancellor Zirion's face went through several color changes before settling on a sickly yellow. Impossible. Humans were eliminated 3,000 years ago. Earth was sterilized. We have the records. The human on the screen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Oh, you certainly tried. Your orbital bombardment was quite thorough. 98% of Earth's surface turned to glass. 11 billion human souls turned to ash in a single day. Yes, Chancellor, we remember. Around the chamber, delegates began to whisper nervously. The Zephyrians' crystalline forms began to glow with agitation. The Vex clicking grew more rapid and urgent. Even the usually stoic Korath seemed uncomfortable. But here's the thing about humans, Admiral Chen continued. We're remarkably good at surviving impossible situations. When your fleets arrived at Earth, not all of us were on the planet. Mining colonies in the asteroid belt, research stations around Jupiter's moons, deep space exploration vessels, we scattered like seeds in the cosmic wind. The Admiral paused, letting his words sink in. For 3,000 years, we've been growing, learning, adapting, and most importantly, remembering why our homeworld burned. Chancellor Zirion tried to regain control of the situation. Human, your species was judged by this council to be a threat to galactic peace. Your aggressive nature, your rapid expansion, your refusal to accept proper guidance. Our refusal to bow, Chen interrupted. Let's be honest about what happened here, Chancellor. Humanity discovered faster-than-light travel independently. We spread to dozens of systems in just 500 years. We refused to accept junior status in your little galactic hierarchy, so you decided to make an example of us. The viewing screen split, showing historical footage that made several delegates look away in shame. The images showed Earth's last day, massive dreadnoughts in orbit, continents disappearing under torrents of plasma fire, the blue jewel of humanity's birth becoming a molten sphere of death. You broadcast our extinction across the galaxy, Chen said, a warning to any species that might consider challenging council authority. Look what happens to those who refuse to submit. How many worlds have fallen in line since then, I wonder? A new voice spoke from the chamber floor. Delegate Kess of the Thrakari Empire, a being that looked like a cross between a bear and a lizard, stood slowly. Admiral Chen, if that is truly your name, the Council's actions against Earth were regrettable but necessary. Humanity's expansion threatened established trade routes. Your military buildup posed a clear danger to peaceful worlds. Chen's laugh was cold. Military buildup? We had 12 light cruisers and a handful of destroyers. The Council fleet that attacked Earth numbered over 3,000 ships. Tell me, Delegate Kess, who was really the threat? The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems. Many delegates refused to meet the human's gaze on the screen. But I'm not here for a history lesson, Chen continued. I'm here to inform you that the Terran remnant has returned to collect what's owed. For 3 millennia, you've enjoyed the peace and prosperity built on the ashes of our world. That time is ending. Chancellor Zirian finally found his voice again. This is preposterous. Even if some humans survived, you couldn't possibly threaten the Council. Our combined fleets number in the hundreds of thousands. Our technology has advanced far beyond what you knew. Has it? Chen asked, and for the first time, his smile seemed genuine. Tell me, Chancellor, how long has it been since the Council faced a real war? Not a police action against primitives, not suppressing a colonial rebellion, but actual warfare against a peer opponent? The question hung in the air. The truth was uncomfortable. The Council had enjoyed 3,000 years of unchallenged supremacy. Their military was vast but largely untested. Your fleets are impressive for intimidating merchant vessels and bombarding helpless worlds, Chen said. But they're commanded by officers who've never faced an enemy that shoots back effectively. Your ships are built for shows of force, not actual combat. As if to emphasize his point, alarms suddenly began blaring throughout Council Prime. The station shuddered slightly, and emergency lighting began flashing. What's happening? Zirion demanded of his aides. A Korath security chief approached the Chancellor's podium. Sir, we're detecting multiple unknown contacts on the station's perimeter. They appeared without any sensor warning. On the viewing screen, Admiral Chen checked something off camera. Ah, good. The rest of my fleet has arrived. Don't worry, Council members. We're not here to destroy your station. We're here to deliver a message. The main display changed again, showing space around Council Prime. Where moments before there had been empty void, dozens of ships now hung in formation. But these weren't the sleek, elegant vessels favored by Council races. They were blocky, angular craft bristling with weapon systems and armored like mobile fortresses. 3,000 years is a long time to plan revenge, Chen said. But it's an even longer time to learn patience. We didn't return as soon as we could. We waited until we were ready. Delegate Kess stood again, his voice shaking slightly. What do you want? Justice, Chen replied simply. But not the quick, clean kind you gave Earth. We're going to dismantle your council piece by piece. Starting with your trade networks. The display shifted to show star charts marking various systems throughout the galaxy. Red symbols appeared over dozens of worlds. As we speak, Terran forces are taking control of key trade hubs throughout Council space. The Kepler Junction, the Centauri Gate, the Vega Nexus, all now under human control. Your precious trade routes are being severed. Chancellor Zirion's forearms gestured frantically. This is madness. You're talking about destroying galactic civilization. No, Chen corrected. We're talking about restructuring it. The same way you restructured the galaxy when you erased Earth. But we'll be more efficient about it. The human leaned forward on the screen. Every world in Council space will have a choice to make in the coming months. They can remain loyal to the organization that murdered an entire species for the crime of independence. Or they can join a new order, one where smaller species aren't expected to bow to the established powers. And if they choose to remain with the Council? Asked a delegate from the back of the chamber. Then they'll discover what it means to face humanity in war, Chen replied. But, unlike the Council's usual tactics, we won't target civilians. We'll simply make it impossible for you to maintain control. The Admiral stood up from whatever chair he'd been sitting in off camera. Council members, you have 6 months to consider your positions. During that time, our blockade will remain in effect. No ships enter or leave Council space without our permission. Use this time wisely. The screen flickered, and for a moment, Chen's expression softened slightly. To the people watching this on worlds throughout the galaxy, We know many of you had no part in Earth's destruction. We know many of your ancestors weren't even born when it happened. This isn't about punishing the innocent for the crimes of the guilty." His expression hardened again. "But it is about ensuring that no species ever again faces what humanity endured. The Council's reign of terror disguised as peace is ending. What replaces it will be determined by the choices made in the coming months." The transmission cut out, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. For several long minutes, no one spoke. Finally, Chancellor Zirion's voice broke the quiet. "Security Chief Krathos, what's the status of our fleets?" The Korath officer consulted his datapad with shaking claws. "Sir, we're receiving reports from across Council space. Human ships have appeared simultaneously in 47 systems. They're not attacking, but they're preventing any ship movement. It's a complete blockade." "How is that possible?" demanded Delegate Kess. "How could they coordinate such a massive operation without our intelligence services detecting it?" No one had an answer. The Council's vast network of spies and sensors had detected nothing until the moment the humans revealed themselves. Outside the station's viewing ports, the human fleet maintained its position. The ships were smaller than the typical Council dreadnoughts. But there was something ominous about their silent presence. They hung in space like predators waiting to strike. In the depths of space, aboard the Terran flagship Remembrance, Admiral Chen stood before a holographic display showing the positions of human forces throughout the galaxy. His staff officers worked quietly at their stations, coordinating the largest military operation in 3 millennia. "Sir," reported his communications officer, a woman with the augmented cybernetic implants that were common among humans who'd spent generations in space. "All fleet elements report successful deployment. The blockade is in effect." Chen nodded. "Signal all ships. Phase 1 is complete. Begin Phase 2 preparations. But maintain the standoff for now. We want them to have time to think about their situation." His tactical officer, a man whose ancestry traced back to the Mars colonies that had escaped Earth's destruction, approached with a datapad. "Admiral, we're receiving transmission requests from several Council member worlds. The Altarians, the Zephyrians, and the Vec all want to negotiate." "Too early," Chen replied. "They still think this is a problem they can solve with words. They need to understand the scope of what's happening first." Through the bridge's main viewport, Council Prime was visible in the distance. The massive station that had served as the symbol of galactic authority for over 2,000 years now looked small and vulnerable against the backdrop of space. Chen thought about the world he'd never seen but would never forget. Earth, the blue marble that had given birth to humanity, had been reduced to stellar debris, but from that destruction had grown something the Council couldn't have anticipated. A human civilization forged by loss and tempered by 3,000 years of careful planning. The scattered survivors of Earth had found each other in the vast darkness between stars. They'd built new homes on airless moons and in the bellies of asteroids. They'd developed technologies the Council had never imagined, driven by the constant memory of what had been taken from them. Most importantly, they'd learned patience. The human desire for revenge could have been satisfied centuries ago with a quick strike at the Council's heart. But that would have been justice without understanding. Instead, they'd waited and watched as the Council grew complacent in its power. Now that patience was about to pay off. "Communications," Chen ordered. "Prepare a message for transmission to every world in Council space. It's time they heard our terms." The bridge crew worked efficiently to prepare the broadcast. In a few hours, every inhabited world in the galaxy would receive the same message. Some would be terrified. Some would be hopeful. But all would understand that the old order was ending. The age of the Council was coming to an end. The age of accountability was about to begin. As the Remembrance held its position in the blockade formation, Chen allowed himself a moment to remember Earth's blue skies, something he'd only seen in historical archives. Soon, the galaxy would learn what it truly meant to face humanity's wrath. Not as a brief, violent spasm, but as an inevitable force of nature, patient and unstoppable as the tide. The Council had sown the wind 3 millennia ago. Now they would reap the whirlwind. 3 weeks after the blockade began, the effects were becoming impossible to ignore. On the industrial world of Factory Prime, manufacturing plants stood silent as supply ships failed to arrive. The Zephyrian crystal farms of Nebula Sector 7 watched their harvests rot without transport vessels to carry them to market. Even the core worlds were feeling the pinch as luxury goods and exotic foods became scarce. Commander Sarah Martinez stood on the bridge of the Terran cruiser Defiance, watching a council convoy attempt to break through their blockade near the Rigel Gate. The convoy consisted of 12 merchant vessels escorted by 4 council destroyers, impressive by peacetime standards, but woefully inadequate against human military doctrine. "They're hailing us again," reported her communications officer. "Let me hear it," Martinez said. The voice that came through the speakers carried the typical arrogance of council naval officers. "Terran vessels. This is Captain Vorth of the CNS Dominator. You are illegally interfering with lawful commerce. Stand down immediately, or face the consequences." Martinez smiled grimly. After 3 weeks, some council commanders still didn't understand what they were dealing with. "Open a channel. This is Commander Martinez of the Terran Remnant Fleet. Captain Vorth, you are attempting to violate a lawfully established blockade. Turn your convoy around and return to your port of origin." "I have my orders from Council Command," Vorth replied. "These supplies are needed on Altair 7. Stand aside." "Captain," Martinez said patiently, "your ships carry weapon-grade plutonium disguised as industrial isotopes, military-grade sensor arrays marked as civilian electronics, and a battalion's worth of combat armor labeled as construction equipment. Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" There was a long pause from the council convoy. When Vorth spoke again, his voice had lost some of its confidence. "How could you possibly know our cargo manifest?" Martinez didn't answer directly. Instead, she gave orders to her tactical officer: "Lock targeting solutions on their escort vessels. Make it clear, but don't fire yet." On the Defiance's main screen, the Council destroyers were highlighted by targeting reticules. The human ship's weapon systems cycled to active status, their energy signatures detectable by any military vessel within sensor range. "Captain Vorth," Martinez continued, "you have 30 seconds to order your convoy to come about. After that, I'll be forced to disable your escorts and board your merchant vessels for inspection." The council captain's response was predictable. "You're outnumbered, Commander. 4 destroyers against 1 cruiser. The odds aren't in your favor." Martinez laughed, a sound that carried no humor. "Captain, you're thinking like someone who's never fought a real war. Tactical, show them what they're actually facing." The space around the Defiance suddenly filled with new contacts as cloaked Terran ships dropped their stealth fields. What had appeared to be a lone cruiser was revealed to be an entire squadron: 6 destroyers, 3 frigates, and a heavy attack vessel that dwarfed anything in the council convoy. "Still feeling confident about those odds, Captain?" Martinez asked. This time, Vorth's surrender came immediately. "Terran Fleet, this is the CNS Dominator. We are powering down weapons and reversing course." "Wise choice," Martinez replied. "And Captain? The next time you try to run military supplies through our blockade, we won't be so generous." As the council convoy retreated, Martinez turned to her first officer. "How many attempts is that this week?" Lieutenant Commander Kim checked his datapad. 17, sir. And they're getting more desperate. This morning's intelligence reports show civilian unrest on 12 council worlds." Martinez nodded. The blockade was working exactly as Admiral Chen had planned. The council's member species were beginning to understand how dependent they'd become on the trade networks that humanity now controlled. Halfway across the galaxy, on the council world of Vector Prime, a very different kind of conversation was taking place. Hive Queen Jess of the Vec Collective sat in her crystalline chamber, her compound eyes reflecting the holographic image of a human woman. "Honored Queen," the human said in perfect Vec clicking speech, "I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. Thank you for agreeing to this communication." Jess's mandibles clicked in what humans would recognize as curiosity. The Vec were among the most intelligent species in the Council, with a hive mind that allowed for incredibly efficient decision-making. Human female Vasquez. This one's collective consciousness is intrigued. For 73 generations, we believed your species extinct. We've been very careful to remain hidden, Vasquez admitted. But the time for hiding is over. Queen Jess, we know the Vec. Remember the old times? Before the Council's formation, your species was once independent, with colonies spanning 36 systems. The Queen's clicking grew more rapid, a sign of agitation. This one remembers the old territories. The Council's integration program reduced our domain by 87%. We were told it was for galactic stability, the same justification they used for destroying Earth, Vasquez said. Your Majesty, humanity has a proposition for the Vec Collective. The Council's power rests on the consent of its member species. If enough worlds withdraw their support, Jess's massive form shifted in her chamber. The Vec Queen was nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms that ended in delicate manipulator claws. Human female Vasquez. You suggest rebellion against the established order. This one's collective consciousness calculates the probable outcomes of such action. Council retaliation would be severe. Would it? Vasquez asked. Queen Jess, when was the last time the Council faced military resistance from a major member species? Would it major member species? The Queen was quiet for several moments, her collective consciousness processing the question. This one cannot recall such an event within recorded memory. That's because there hasn't been one, Vasquez said. The Council maintains power through the threat of force, not through actual military superiority. They've never had to fight a war against an opponent who could fight back effectively. The holographic display shifted to show star charts of Vec space. Red markers indicated the positions of Terran ships. We've positioned our forces to protect any world that chooses to withdraw from the Council, Vasquez continued. The Vec Collective could reclaim its independence without fear of retaliation. Queen Jess's compound eyes studied the display carefully. And what would humanity gain from Vec independence? Justice, Vasquez replied. And the knowledge that the Council can no longer destroy species that refuse to submit to its authority. The conversation continued for another hour, but the outcome was inevitable. The Vec Collective's decision-making process was remarkably efficient, and they'd already calculated the advantages of independence over continued Council membership. Meanwhile, on Council Prime, Chancellor Zirion was discovering that holding an empire together was much harder than maintaining it during peacetime. His daily briefings had become exercises in crisis management, as reports flooded in from across Council space. The situation is becoming untenable, reported Admiral Korash, the Council's military commander. The Korath officers' scales had lost their usual luster, a sign of extreme stress among his species. We've lost contact with 17 member worlds in the past week. Intelligence suggests they're in negotiation with the Terrans. What about our fleet deployments? Zirion asked. Can we break the blockade? Admiral Korash's laugh was bitter. Chancellor, we have a fundamental problem. Our military doctrine has been based on intimidating inferior opponents. We've never developed strategies for fighting a peer enemy. The Admiral activated a holographic display showing the current military situation. Council space was surrounded by a ring of red markers indicating Terran positions. Their ships use stealth technology we can barely detect, Korash continued. Their weapons are more advanced than ours, and most importantly, their crews have been training for actual combat for 3,000 years. Our officers have been training for parade reviews. Zerion's forearms gestured in frustration. Are you telling me the entire Council fleet is useless? Not useless, Korash corrected, but inadequate for this kind of conflict. We could probably defeat them in a straight fleet engagement if we could bring our full force to bear, but they're not fighting that kind of war. The display zoomed in on various contested systems. They hit our supply lines, disable our communication relays, and disappear before we can respond. It's guerrilla warfare on a galactic scale. As if to prove the Admiral's point, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. A junior officer rushed to Zirion's side with a datapad. "Sir, we're receiving reports of attacks on our listening posts in the Outer Rim. 12 installations have gone dark in the past hour." Zirion studied the reports with growing dismay. The humans weren't just maintaining a blockade. They were systematically dismantling the Council's intelligence network. "Sir," another officer called out, "incoming priority transmission from the Altarian delegation." The main screen activated to show the familiar four-armed form of Delegate Marin, one of Zirion's oldest political allies. But instead of the usual composed demeanor of an Altarian diplomat, Marin looked haggard. "Chancellor," Marin said without preamble, "the Altarian Federation is formally withdrawing from the Galactic Council." The words hit Zirion like a physical blow. The Altarians were one of the founding members of the Council, with the second largest fleet in Council space. "Marin, you can't be serious," Zirion said. "The Altarian Federation helped create the Council. We've been allies for over 2 millennia, and in those 2 millennia, we've watched the Council transform from a mutual defense pact into a tool of oppression," Marin replied. "The destruction of Earth was the beginning, Chancellor. Since then, how many worlds have been pacified for the crime of seeking independence?" The Altarian delegate continued, his voice growing stronger. "The humans have made us an offer we cannot refuse. Complete autonomy over our internal affairs, restoration of our lost colonial territories, and protection from Council retaliation. In exchange, we simply withdraw our support from an organization that no longer serves our interests." "This is madness," Zirion protested. "The humans are manipulating you. They're using your pride against the Council's interests." "No, Chancellor," Marin said sadly. "They're offering us what the Council never did, a choice. The Federation Council has voted unanimously. We're done." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. The loss of the Altarian Federation wasn't just a political blow, it was a military disaster. Nearly 30% of the Council's total fleet strength had just withdrawn from service. Admiral Koresh studied his tactical displays with the look of someone watching a carefully constructed plan fall apart. "Chancellor, if the Zephyrians follow the Altarians' lead..." He didn't need to finish the thought. The Zephyrian Republic commanded another 20% of Council naval strength. Their departure would leave the Council with less than half its original military capacity. Across the galaxy, Admiral Chen sat in his private quarters aboard the Remembrance, reviewing reports from human commanders throughout Council space. The campaign was proceeding ahead of schedule. 3 major member species had already withdrawn from the Council, and intelligence suggested that 5 more were considering similar action. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. The holographic projector activated to show the face of Captain Rebecca Torres, commander of the human forces in the Vega sector. "Admiral," Torres reported, "the Thrakari Empire has officially requested a meeting with our diplomatic team. They're offering to withdraw from the Council in exchange for continued trade access." Chen nodded approvingly. The Thrakari were pragmatists above all else. They'd calculated the economic cost of continued Council membership and found it wanting. "What about the Korath hegemony?" Chen asked. "Still holding out," Torres replied. "But their position is becoming untenable. 3 of their client species have already defected, and their home system is completely surrounded by our forces." Chen leaned back in his chair, studying the strategic situation. The original plan had called for a 2-year campaign to dismantle the Council's power structure. At the current rate, it might be accomplished in 6 months. "Captain, what's the status of Operation Deep Strike?" Torres consulted her datapad. "All teams are in position, sir. We can begin the next phase at your command." Operation Deep Strike was the most ambitious part of the human strategy. Rather than simply blockading Council space, they planned to capture the Council's strategic infrastructure. The hyperspace relay stations that made faster-than-light communication possible across the galaxy. "Not yet," Chen decided. "Let them stew a little longer. I want the Council to understand their position is hopeless before we move to the final phase." The Admiral dismissed Torres and turned to study the star charts displayed on his cabin wall. Each light represented a world that had suffered under council rule. Some had been conquered outright, others had been forced into unfavorable treaties that stripped them of their sovereignty. Earth's blue light was notably absent from the display, a reminder of what the council was capable of when challenged. But soon, Chen thought, there would be justice for every world the council had wronged. The campaign was entering its critical phase. Soon, the council would be forced to choose between total surrender and a final, desperate battle that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Either way, the age of council supremacy was coming to an end. The final confrontation came not with the thunder of fleets in battle, but with the quiet desperation of a dying empire. Chancellor Zirion stood alone in his private chambers aboard Council Prime, staring at the holographic display that showed the collapse of everything he'd spent his life building. The numbers were devastating. In less than 2 months, the Galactic Council had lost 63% of its member species. The Altarian Federation, the Zephyrian Republic, the Vec Collective, and dozens of smaller worlds had all withdrawn their support. The remaining loyalist systems were scattered islands in a sea of human-controlled space. A soft chime announced an incoming communication. Zarion almost ignored it. Most of his remaining allies had nothing but bad news to report. But duty compelled him to answer. The face that appeared in the hologram was not one of his desperate admirals or panicking delegates. It was Admiral Marcus Chen himself. Chancellor Zirion, Chen said, his voice carrying the same calm authority it had during their first encounter. I believe it's time we spoke directly. Zirion straightened his formal robes, trying to maintain some dignity despite the circumstances. Admiral Chen, have you contacted me to gloat over the Council's fall? No, Chen replied simply. I've contacted you to discuss terms for your surrender. The word hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Surrender. After 3,000 years of unchallenged dominance, the Galactic Council was being asked to surrender to the descendants of a species they'd tried to exterminate. What makes you think the Council will surrender? Zirion asked, though even he could hear the hollow defiance in his own voice. Chen's expression remained patient. Chancellor, let me show you something. The hologram expanded to include a tactical display of the galaxy. Red markers indicated human fleet positions, while blue markers showed remaining Council forces. The disparity was shocking. The humans now controlled nearly 80% of galactic space. Your remaining loyal systems are completely cut off from each other, Chen explained. Your supply lines have been severed. Your communication networks are under our control. You have perhaps a dozen functioning military installations left, and they're all surrounded. Zirion studied the display with the growing certainty of a doomed man. What are your terms? Complete dissolution of the Galactic Council as a governing body, Chen began, his tone becoming formal. All Council military forces to be disbanded. War crimes. Tribunals for those responsible for xenocide and other atrocities. Reparations to be paid to species harmed by Council actions. The Chancellor's forearms trembled slightly. Impossible. The Council represents the natural order of galactic civilization. Without central authority, there will be chaos. Chen's laugh was cold. Chancellor, you keep using that word, civilization. But what you really mean is submission. The Council's idea of order has always been based on forcing smaller species to bow to larger ones. The display changed to show historical records, the destruction of Earth, the forced relocations of the Andromedan refugees, the economic subjugation of the Tau Ceti colonies, 3 millennia of systematic oppression disguised as enlightened governance. This is what your natural order looks like, Chen continued. Genocide, slavery, and cultural extinction. All justified by the supposed superiority of Council species. Zirion wanted to argue, to defend the system he'd served his entire life, but the evidence was undeniable. The Council's record was written in the ashes of destroyed worlds and the tears of enslaved populations. What would replace the Council? Zirion asked quietly. Nothing, Chen replied. At least, nothing like the Council. Individual species will govern themselves. Trade and diplomacy will be conducted on equal terms between sovereign nations. There will be no central authority with the power to destroy worlds that refuse to submit. The concept was alien to Zirian's thinking. For his entire life, galactic civilization had been synonymous with council rule. The idea of truly independent species seemed chaotic and dangerous. It won't work, Zirian said. Without central coordination, there will be wars. Conflicts over resources, territorial disputes, trade disagreements. The galaxy will tear itself apart, perhaps, Chen admitted. But those wars will be between equals, not the systematic extermination of inferiors by their supposed betters. And speaking as someone whose species was nearly exterminated by your peaceful system, I think we can manage. As if to emphasize Chen's point, new reports appeared on the tactical display. The Thrakari Empire and the Regelian Alliance had just signed a mutual defense pact, former council subjects working together as equals. The galaxy is already adapting, Chen observed. Species that were once enemies under council rule are becoming allies. It turns out that most wars were caused by the council's divide and conquer tactics, not by natural aggression between species. Zirian was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. Finally, he spoke again. And if the council refuses your terms? Chen's expression hardened. Then we'll implement them by force. Chancellor, you still seem to think this is a negotiation. It's not. The council's authority ended the moment we arrived. What I'm offering you is a chance to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. You're talking about the complete destruction of galactic government, Zirian protested. No, Chen corrected. I'm talking about the destruction of galactic tyranny. There's a difference. The transmission fell silent as both leaders considered their positions. Zirian knew he had very few options left. The Council's remaining military forces were no match for the human fleet. Even a desperate last stand would only result in more casualties, without changing the ultimate outcome. I need time to consult with the remaining council members, Zirian said finally. You have 24 hours, Chen replied. After that, we begin the final phase of our operation. The hologram disappeared, leaving Zirian alone with his thoughts and the weight of 3 millennia of history. Outside his chambers, the massive space station that had symbolized council authority continued its slow rotation, unaware that its time as the center of galactic power was ending. 12 hours later, in the depths of space near the galactic rim, a very different conversation was taking place. Grand Admiral Vex Korath, Supreme Commander of the Council's remaining military forces, stood on the bridge of the Super Dreadnought Final Authority. The massive warship was the largest vessel ever constructed by Council shipyards, designed to intimidate through sheer size rather than engage in actual combat. Admiral, reported his tactical officer, human scouts have been detected in the outer system. They're maintaining distance but clearly monitoring our position. Korath's scaled hide rippled with suppressed anger. As a member of a proud warrior species, the idea of surrender was almost physically painful to him. How many ships do we have combat ready? 47 vessels in total, the tactical officer replied. 12 dreadnoughts, 23 cruisers, and 12 destroyers. We also have the Final Authority itself. It was an impressive force by any historical standard. Enough firepower to level a small planet. Under normal circumstances, it would have been more than sufficient to enforce council authority over any rebellious system. But these weren't normal circumstances. Intelligence reports suggested the humans had over 300 active combat vessels, each one designed specifically for warfare rather than intimidation. Sir, the communications officer called out. Incoming transmission from the human fleet. Korath straightened to his full imposing height. On screen, the bridge's main display activated to show the interior of a human warship. The officer who appeared was younger than Korath had expected, a human female with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Grand Admiral Korath, she said in accented but competent galactic standard. I am Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen, commanding the Terran Expeditionary Force. I believe you know why I'm here. You're here to demand our surrender. Korath replied, with as much dignity as he could muster. Actually, I'm here to offer you a choice, Admiral Chen corrected. Your government has already agreed to the dissolution of the council. You can either stand down peacefully or force us to disable your fleet through direct action. Korath's laugh was harsh. Human, your reputation precedes you. But you've never faced the full might of a Korath battle fleet. We are warriors, not the pampered politicians you've been intimidating. Grand Admiral, Chen said patiently, with respect to your species' martial traditions, when was the last time Korath forces engaged in actual combat? Not a punitive expedition against primitives, but warfare against a peer opponent? The question struck uncomfortably close to home. The truth was that the Korath military, despite its fearsome reputation, hadn't fought a real war in over 500 years. Tactical analysis suggests you have significant numerical superiority, Korath admitted. But quantity has its own quality. The final authority alone outguns any 3 ships in your fleet. Chen nodded approvingly. A fair assessment. But Grand Admiral, you're still thinking in terms of traditional fleet engagements. That's not how humans fight. As if to demonstrate her point, the space around Korath's fleet suddenly filled with new contacts. What had appeared to be empty void was revealed to be crawling with human ships. Not large dreadnoughts, but smaller, more maneuverable vessels that had approached under cloak. Stealth frigates, Chen explained. Each one carries enough firepower to cripple a dreadnought. They've been in position around your fleet for the past 6 hours. Korath studied his tactical displays with growing unease. The humans had achieved complete tactical surprise, while his supposedly superior sensors detected nothing. You could have destroyed us at any time, he realized. Yes, Chen confirmed, but we're not interested in unnecessary slaughter. Grand Admiral, your choice is simple. Order your fleet to stand down, and your crews will be allowed to return home with honor. Force us to fight, and a lot of brave warriors will die for a government that's already surrendered. The Korath commander was quiet for several minutes, weighing his options. His warrior's pride demanded a fight, but his tactical mind recognized the hopelessness of his position. What guarantees do we have? Korath asked finally. The word of the Terran remnant fleet, Chen replied. We don't make war on honorable opponents who surrender with dignity. Your ships will be escorted to the nearest neutral port. Your crews will be treated with the respect due to professional military personnel. It was more than Korath had expected. The Council's standard practice with defeated enemies was considerably less generous. I need to consult with my ship commanders, Korath said. Of course, Chen replied. But Grand Admiral? Don't take too long. My people have been patient for 3,000 years. That patience isn't infinite. 2 hours later, the surrender was complete. One by one, the Council's remaining warships powered down their weapons and accepted human escort to neutral space. The mighty Final Authority followed last, its proud Korath crew maintaining discipline even in defeat. As the last Council vessel departed, Admiral Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The military phase of the campaign was over. The Galactic Council, as a governing body, no longer existed, but victory brought new challenges. Across the galaxy, hundreds of worlds were struggling to adapt to their sudden independence. Some were thriving, forming new alliances and trade agreements. Others were experiencing the growing pains of self-governance after millennia of external control. On Council Prime, now renamed Unity Station, representatives from dozens of species were gathering for the first Galactic Congress. Not a governing body like the old Council, but a forum for diplomacy and cooperation between sovereign species. Admiral Marcus Chen stood in what had once been the Council chamber, watching delegates from across the galaxy take their seats. The Altarians sat beside the Zephyrians. The Vec Collective's representatives clicked quiet conversations with former enemies. And in the front row, a special seat had been reserved for the representative of Earth. That seat remained symbolically empty, a reminder of the price of tyranny and the cost of justice. Admiral, a voice called from behind him. Chen turned to see Chancellor Zirion approaching, no longer wearing the elaborate robes of office but dressed in the simple clothing of a private citizen. Zirion, Chen acknowledged. How are you adapting to retirement? The former chancellor's laugh held genuine amusement. Better than I expected. It's liberating, actually. For the first time in centuries, I don't have to pretend that oppression is justice. The two former enemies stood together, watching as the galaxy's new representatives debated trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. The discussions were chaotic, sometimes heated, but notably lacking the underlying threat of violence that had characterized council sessions. "Do you think it will work?" Zirion asked. "This new system of yours?" Chen considered the question carefully. "Probably not perfectly. There will be conflicts, trade disputes, probably even wars, but they'll be honest conflicts between equals, not the systematic oppression of the weak by the strong. And if a species tries to dominate others? If another council arises?" Chen's smile was grim. "Then they'll discover that humanity has a very long memory and a very strong commitment to preventing genocide. We'll be watching." As if to emphasize his point, a holographic display at the side of the chamber showed the current disposition of Terran forces throughout the galaxy. The human fleet had not disbanded after the Council's surrender. Instead, they had taken on a new mission, Guardians of Galactic Peace, ensuring that no species would ever again face the fate that had befallen Earth. The session was called to order by Ambassador Elena Vasquez, who had been elected as the first speaker of the Galactic Congress. Her opening words echoed across the galaxy, carried by communication networks that were no longer controlled by a central authority. "Representatives of the free peoples of the galaxy," she began. "We gather today not as subjects of an empire, but as equals in a community of nations. Let this day mark the beginning of a new age, an age where diversity is celebrated, not suppressed, and where the smallest voice carries the same weight as the largest fleet." In the symbolic empty seat reserved for Earth, a small blue crystal caught the chamber's lights. A fragment of Earth's ocean, somehow preserved through 3 millennia and recovered from the ruins of humanity's birth world. It served as both memorial and warning, a reminder of what had been lost and a promise that such loss would never be permitted again. The age of the Council was over. The age of freedom had begun. As the Congress debated and the galaxy adapted to its new reality, Admiral Chen allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, not through the quick violence of revenge, but through the patient dismantling of an unjust system. Earth's children had come home at last, bringing with them the promise that never again would a species face extinction for the crime of wanting to be free. The stars themselves seemed brighter now, no longer shrouded by the shadow of an empire built on the ashes of the innocent. Humanity had returned to the galaxy not as conquerors, but as liberators, ensuring that the universe would remember the lesson written in Earth's destruction. Freedom is never free, but the price of tyranny is always higher. 3 millennia after the Galactic Council erased Earth, humanity had delivered their promised retribution, not through destruction, but through the creation of something better. A galaxy where every species could write its own destiny among the stars.